Germany. The war in Europe was almost over. American tanks were moving through broken towns. German soldiers were surrendering. Families were walking through streets filled with dust, fear, and silence. But in one small German town, a young girl stepped into the road and begged General George S. Patton to stop. She was holding a child. The soldiers thought they understood what they were seeing. A frightened mother, a hungry baby, a desperate plea for mercy. But then the girl said something that changed everything. She was not the mother. And the reason she had begged Patton would reveal one of the hardest truths of war. Sometimes the innocent do not wear uniforms. Sometimes they are just children left behind by adults who vanished, ran, or died. This story comes from the chaotic final days of World War II, when Germany was collapsing and American soldiers were no longer only fighting battles. They were entering towns, searching buildings, feeding civilians, guarding prisoners, and trying to understand a country that had been destroyed from the inside. By spring 1945, Nazi Germany was breaking apart. The Allied armies had crossed into German territory from the west. The Soviet army was closing in from the east. Roads were filled with refugees, wounded soldiers, broken wagons, and civilians who had lost homes, food, and family. For American troops, victory did not feel simple. A captured town could still hide danger. A quiet doorway could hide a sniper. A basement could hold weapons. A road could be mined. Even civilians could be used by retreating German forces to slow the American advance. So when Patton's men entered a town, they did not enter like tourists. They entered carefully. Engines rolled slowly. Rifles stayed ready. Windows were watched. Every face was studied. Because in 1945, one mistake could still kill a man. General George S. Patton was one of the most famous American commanders of the war. His Third Army had moved fast across Europe, pushing hard into German territory. His style was aggressive, direct, and sometimes harsh. He believed speed saved lives because hesitation gave the enemy time to recover. But speed also created a problem. When an army moves fast, it does not only meet enemy soldiers. It meets civilians, prisoners, orphans, laborers, and survivors. It reaches places where the war has already broken families before anyone has time to count the damage. And that is where this story begins. The exact details of this incident are difficult to verify, like many stories told from the final weeks of World War II. But the situation it describes is historically real. American troops entering defeated German towns, facing civilians in crisis, and being forced to make fast decisions where justice and mercy stood side by side. The town was quiet when the American vehicles arrived. Too quiet, the kind of silence that comes after days of shell fire, when people are alive but afraid to prove it. A few civilians stood near doorways. Some watched from behind curtains. Others kept their heads down, hoping the Americans would pass without trouble. Then, near the edge of the road, the soldiers saw her. A German girl. Not a grown woman. Not a soldier. A girl. She was thin, tired, and shaking. Her clothes were dirty from travel or hiding. In her arms, she held a small child wrapped in cloth. At first, the soldiers may have thought she was just another civilian begging for help. By then, American troops had seen many scenes like this. Women asking for food, old men asking for protection, children searching for parents, families trying to survive one more day. But this girl was different. She did not stay back. She came forward. And that was dangerous. American soldiers shouted for her to stop. They did not know if she was being used as a trap. They did not know if German soldiers were watching from nearby houses. They did not know if someone had placed explosives under the road. But the girl kept moving. She was crying now. The child in her arms was silent. That silence made the moment worse. Because in war, a crying child is painful, but a child too weak to cry is frightening. The girl begged the soldiers in broken words. She pointed to the child. She pointed toward the town. She tried to explain, but fear made every sentence fall apart. Then Patton was told. Whether he was directly at the scene or received the report through his officers, the problem was the kind commanders in 1945 faced again and again. Was this a trap? Was this a civilian emergency? Was this a German family trying to escape punishment? Or was this something else? Patton had built his reputation on action. He was not known as a soft man. Soldiers knew his temper, enemies knew his speed. Even his own officers understood that he disliked delay. But he also understood something important about command. A general does not only decide how to attack. A general decides what kind of discipline his army will carry after the shooting stops. So the girl was brought closer. The soldiers questioned her. At first, they believed the child was hers. That would have made sense. A young mother alone in a ruined town begging for food or safety. But then she kept repeating the same thing. She was not the mother. The child was not hers. She had found the child after the adults were gone. Maybe the mother had died. Maybe the family had fled. Maybe someone had handed the child to her and never returned. In the collapse of Germany, all of those things were possible. By 1945, millions of people in Europe had been forced from their homes. Some were prisoners of war. Some were forced laborers. Some were concentration camp survivors. Some were German civilians fleeing bombed cities or advancing armies. Many children were separated from parents in the confusion. In that world, identity could disappear quickly. A name could be lost. A family could be split at a road crossing. A baby could become the responsibility of the nearest person brave enough not to walk away, and that was the truth behind the girl's plea. She was not begging only for herself. She was begging because she had become the child's last protection. That is what made the moment powerful. She had no rank, no weapon, no authority, no reason to believe anyone would listen. But she stepped into the road anyway. For Patton's soldiers, this was a different kind of battlefield. There was no enemy line to break, no tank to destroy, no hill to capture. There was only a girl, a child, and a decision. And decisions like this mattered. Because after a war, armies do not just leave footprints on roads. They leave memories in the people who survive them. If soldiers acted with cruelty, civilians remembered cruelty. If soldiers acted with discipline, civilians remembered order. If soldiers showed mercy at the right moment, even defeated people understood that the new power was different from the old one. Patton's army had seen what Nazi Germany had done. They had seen prisoners, camps, ruined towns, and the results of a system built on fear. Many American soldiers were angry. Some had lost friends days before the surrender. Some had walked past bodies that could never be forgotten. So mercy was not simple. It never is after violence. But this child was not responsible for the war. And the girl holding the child was not a Nazi commander, not an SS guard, and not a battlefield enemy. She was a young person standing in the wreckage of decisions made by powerful men. That is why this story matters. It shows the moment where history becomes human. When we talk about World War II, we often speak in numbers, armies, divisions, casualties, miles advanced, cities captured. But numbers cannot show what it felt like to stand in a broken street with a child in your arms, begging soldiers from another country to believe you. Numbers cannot show how heavy one small life can feel when everyone else has disappeared. And numbers cannot show how difficult it is for a soldier to lower his suspicion without lowering his guard. For construction fans, there is another layer to this story. War does not only destroy people, it destroys the systems that keep people alive. Roads break, bridges fall, hospitals lose power, water lines stop working, homes become shells. A town can still be standing, but if the food supply, shelter, medicine, and transport are gone, life inside it begins to collapse. That is what American forces found as they moved through Germany. They were not only taking territory, they were entering damaged human systems. Every street had to be secured. Every building had to be checked. Every civilian crowd had to be controlled. And every emergency had to be judged quickly. The girl's plea was one small moment inside that huge collapse. But small moments can reveal the truth better than big speeches. Because this was not about politics. It was about responsibility. The girl could have left the child. She could have hidden. She could have saved herself first. But she did not. Somewhere inside that destroyed world, she made a choice. This child would not be abandoned. And that choice forced armed men to stop and look. Imagine the scene. The road still dusty from military vehicles. American soldiers watching the windows. German civilians silent in doorways. A general's convoy held up by a crying girl. And in her arms, a child who had no idea which army had won, which flag had fallen, or why the world around them had become so dangerous. That child only needed one thing: to live. In the end, the girl's words changed how the soldiers saw her. She was not a mother trying to protect only her own family. She was a witness to a broken society. She was proof that even in a defeated country, even among people surrounded by guilt and ruin, ordinary human courage could still appear. That does not erase what Nazi Germany did. It does not soften the crimes of the regime. It does not turn defeat into innocence. But it reminds us that history is never clean when it reaches the ground. A nation can be guilty, a regime can be evil, an army can be defeated, and still, in the middle of all of it, one child can be hungry, one girl can be terrified, and one decision can matter. That is the burden soldiers carried in 1945. They had to defeat the enemy. Then they had to face the people left behind. And sometimes those people were not asking for victory. They were asking for mercy. Patton's reputation was built on movement, power, and command. But stories like this remind us that command is not only about how fast tanks move, it is also about what happens when the tanks stop, when the shooting fades, when the enemy is beaten, when a child is placed in front of history and someone must decide whether to see a problem, a risk, or a human life. The German girl begged Patton because she had no one else to ask. She was not the mother. But in that moment, she acted like the only family that child had left. And maybe that is the most powerful part of the story. War can destroy countries. It can break armies. It can turn proud cities into dust. But it cannot fully destroy the small human instinct to protect someone weaker. That is why this moment still feels worth telling. Not because it changes the outcome of World War II, not because it belongs to a grand battlefield victory, but because it asks a question that still matters. When the world becomes cruel, who will still choose mercy? And who will be brave enough to beg for it? If this story made you think about the hidden human side of World War II, subscribe for more documentary-style history stories. Because sometimes the most unforgettable moments of war are not found in the biggest battles, but in the quiet seconds when one human life forces history to stop.